Good morning and happy Halloween, fellow Moorcockians. I've been saying for a while that I was going to do a video about Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion series, and particularly about Elric. And I realized I hadn't done it, so I thought I would give it a start. This may require more than one video because I want to keep these kind of short. Um, the Eternal Champion was created in about 1962 by brilliant, brilliant British science fiction writer and fantasy writer Michael Moorcock. Um, and The Eternal Champion is basically a manifestation of a hero and or anti-hero who can be different personalities in different eras, different planets, different places. Rather a brilliant structure for a number of very varied Moorcock novels. But the classic four Eternal Champions are Eric, also known as John Dacre, also known as Ulrich Scarsall, um, Coram, the prince with the metal hand and the prince with one eye, also called Coram Banon Florin, and Coram Jehalan Israi in different manifestations. Hawkmoon of Grand Breton, Dorian Hawkmoon is his full name, and Elric of Melniboné, who is, of course, my favorite. Why is Elric my favorite? I don't really know. I think he's the most sympathetic, the most interesting, the most well-drawn of all of the versions of the Eternal Champion, although his story is tragic, where some of the others, particularly Hawkmoon, actually have a more positive resolution, as does Aracosa in some ways. And I'll get into that a little more. Um, Elric is an albino. He is an emperor. He's the last emperor of the Dragon Isle of Melniboné, the 428th emperor. He's an albino. He is weak and has to sustain himself by taking certain drugs and by sorcery. This is interesting in itself. In previous novels, like the Conan novels of Robert Howard and things by Edgar Rice Burroughs and things, sorcerers were evil. Sorcerers were the people who the barbarian hero goes after and kills and tries to destroy. But Elric himself is both a swordsman and a sorcerer, so he combines those two, and maybe that's one of the reasons I like him. He's also a dragon rider, an expert dragon rider, and I've always loved stories about dragons. And he is a very complex character. He's a member of a race called Melnibonéans, who are not human, but they're humanoid, slightly elfin, and they don't have human morals. They are cruel, they're barbarous in some ways, and yet highly civilized in others. But Elric doesn't act this way. Elric wants to explore what humanity is about, and he has emotions that are not typical, which makes him something of an enemy to his cousin Irkun, who wants to usurp his throne and also lusts after his fiancée, who is Irkun's own sister, Simoral. And that's a bit creepy. But apparently incest is not something that's frowned upon in Melnibonéan society, as it is in human society. Uh, and Again, some people call Elric the first Targaryen. I find that a little insulting, considering that Elric was written in 1962, and George R. R. Martin, I don't think, was even writing back then. Or if he was, he certainly wasn't writing about the Targaryens. If anything, it's the reverse. The Targaryens are based on Elric, not vice versa. Um, Perhaps another compelling reason why I'm enjoy reading the Elric stories so much is that I myself have dated an albino who was, quite frankly, one of the most beautiful women I've ever dated. So no, lack of melanin does not equate to lack of beauty. She was half Swedish, half Italian, if you can imagine that. Face and body of a goddess. And very intelligent, very funny, really a nice, terrific lady. So again, don't equate people like Paul Bettany, who's less than attractive, with all albinos. There are a lot of beautiful albino women. If you look up the term beautiful albino women on Google, you'll see quite a number of really stunning, stunning women. Um, anyway, I divert. In reading Elric, I don't know what happened. I first encountered Elric when I was in college, and I found a copy of Elric of Melniboné, though it was not this copy, but a different one. This is a really excellent version, and I highly recommend. This is the Golanx version from England, and I highly recommend it. I found the DAW copy, which unfortunately I no longer have, but it was in a dollar bin at a bookstore called Second Chance Books across the street from San Francisco State University, which I attended in my sophomore year of college. And I had seen the book before and bypassed it. I went through a phase where I wasn't reading any fantasy. I would only read science fiction. And I think at a certain point when I got to college, I said, this is stupid. This is ridiculous. I need to read, a bit more diversely. And I opened the book and I read the first line. It is the color of a bleached skull, his flesh. I thought, holy crap, anyone who can write that well, I have to read this book. And I basically devoured it. I read it in an afternoon, went back to the bookstore and got the next two novels, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, which is not as good a book, but I still enjoyed it because it's not entirely about Elric, and The Weird of the White Wolf, which is about Elric entirely and is really good. I had some difficulty for some reason in finding the fourth book, I found the fourth book, The Vanishing Tower. It was the fifth book, The Bane of the Black Sword, that I had difficulty. I finally found it at Dangerous Visions bookstore in Sherman Oaks, where I was eventually, about 20 years later, briefly employed. Best job I've ever had. Then I've read Stormbringer, which is the conclusion. I'm not going to post too many spoilers here because, again, the events of Stormbringer are rather tragic. But I will talk about it a little bit because it's integral to the story. In telling Elric's story, it's basically, it's a love triangle between, Elric, Symoril, and Irkun. Obviously, it's also a story about being tempted by fate and making incorrect choices based on what we think is the right thing, which I think all of us do. And maybe that's one of the reasons I like Elric. He's mortal. He makes a lot of mistakes, but they're not mistakes that anybody else might not make given, his circumstances. And again, it makes him a bit more human, albeit at times he acts completely monstrously. He is, in fact, a mass murderer and, really a horrible person in some ways, but he's still sympathetic. And the fact that he's still sympathetic, I think, is a testament to Moorcock's writing. I think Moorcock is a fantastic author, and I recommend everything he's ever written. Even his nonfiction stuff is brilliant. I loved his treatment of The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which talks about the history of the Sex Pistols, and also Into the Media Web, which talks about, TV and radio and advertising. Brilliant stuff. Everything of his is really terrific, and he is my favorite author without reservation. I am lucky enough that I'm not his friend, but I'm his acquaintance, and I know him somewhat, and I've enjoyed that relationship for quite a while. Anyway, getting back to the Eternal Champion series, as I said, there's these four basics: the Ericosa, Hawkmoon, Corum, and Elric. Each of them appear in a series of novels. Elric had originally those first six, which are Elric of Melniboné, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, The Weird of the White Wolf, The Vanishing Tower, The Bane of the Black Sword, and Stormbringer. Then in I believe 1991, Moorcock wrote a new Elric novel, The Fortress of the Pearl, which is when I met him at Dangerous Visions bookstore when he was signing the DAW paperback of that book, which unfortunately I no longer have. But then after that, he wrote what I believe is my personal favorite. And fortunately, he was good enough to send me this beautiful British copy of The Revenge of the Rose with this lovely cover artwork by the terrific Robert Gould, who did covers for the other Elric books as well. And this one is personally inscribed, which I really love. This is my treasure, this book. And I'm very pleased to have it, and that he sent it to me for free, I might note. I also have this, which is a compilation of some of the Elric stories. Elric, the Song of the Black Sword. This is a White Wolf Press version. White Wolf Press went under, unfortunately. They no longer exist. And this also is personally inscribed. Anyway, the history of Elric goes on in these books, which is interesting because, again, without giving too much away, but these books are, about 40, 50 years old. Elric is killed at the end of Stormbringer by Stormbringer, his own sword, which then is actually revealed to be a demon who laughs at him, says, "I was 1,000 times more, farewell, friend, I was 1,000 times more evil than thou." And it goes up and laughs at the cosmic balance, which is a fantastic ending to the series. But of course, it's not the end of the series, because the series goes on, including this, the latest one, Elric, the Citadel of Forgotten Myths, which I have previously reviewed, so I won't talk too much about in this review. Why is Elric so popular? Why do I like Elric so much, even though he's an anti-hero? And let me explain briefly, for those who are unfamiliar, what an anti-hero is and why Elric is an anti-hero, not a hero. An anti-hero may do some of the same things as a hero does, but he often does them for self-interest, not out of any interest in the common good or doing things that are right. An example I could give is in the Citadel of Forgotten Myths. There's a scene where Elric says, if people think that I'm a legend, even though you and I know that I'm not, he says it to Moonglum, I'm perfectly willing to let them believe that if it helps us towards our own goal. What makes that anti-heroic is, again, he's willing to do the right thing. He's willing to defend this city, but he's doing it because he wants answers. He wants to find out about his origins and the origin of the Melnibonéan race and their relationship to the dragon-like Furn. And he'll do anything to do that. Plus, he wants this map to get back to his world. So he's not defending these people because it's the right thing to do and he's a hero and that's what he does. He's doing it because he wants what he wants. That in itself makes him an anti-hero, not a hero. But again, it doesn't really matter, in that he's an interesting, intriguing character who's very multidimensional. He's not a cardboard cutout, Conan ripoff. He and his Hellsword Stormbringer, which steals people's souls and feeds him the energy, kind of cleave a path through history. There's even a story called Elric at the End of Time, where he intermingles with Moorcock's End of Time characters who are hilarious in and of themselves. If you haven't read that series, you should. One of Moorcock's compatriots, I'm not sure, I think it was J.G. Ballard, said, if Elric was met these End of Time characters, he'd think they were the Lords of Chaos by the way they behaved. And he took that and ran with it and wrote a very excellent story, which is a little bit of a parody of Elric, but still, really good, and fits into the chronology well. Elric is often left with questions in the stories. The Dead Gods book, he goes after this book that's supposed to, answer all the questions. Every question that he has will be answered if he can find this book. And of course, he finds it, he picks it up, it crumbles to dust in his hands, and he's left with nothing, which often happens when we look for easy answers. And I think that's kind of the point. His reliance on Stormbringer is meant to be a reflection of what happens when we rely on crutches and not our own inner strength, and don't seek our own inner knowledge. We look for answers from the outside instead of the inside. And again, that's what Moorcock intended, I know, because he told me. Maybe, again, that's one of the reasons I find Elric so sympathetic, is his struggles are basically, even though they take place in this fantastic world, there's people with dragons and demons and lords of chaos and the lords of law, are not that different from the struggles of the everyday man to find out, who am I, why am I here, what's my purpose in life? And so as he struggles, we struggle along with him. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why I find him such a sympathetic character, albeit he's portrayed sometimes as evil. But again, that depends on what one's definition of evil is. I would say he's not a villain. A villain is somebody who is only out for his own purposes and, hates everybody, basically, just wants what they want and, screw the rest of the world. That's not Elric. Elric is not that way at all. Elric, yes, wants answers, and he wants to do things his own way, which goes against his Melnibonéan upbringing. But he's not evil. He's not seeking to destroy the world. He's just seeking to understand himself and his place in the world. And that's a very understandable quest, because we all have that. Um, I highly recommend that you read all of these novels. And he even appears in some of Moorcock's other works, like he appears in the Second Ether novels, which, for those who haven't read them, are Blood, A Southern Fantasy, Fabulous Harbors, and The War Amongst the Angels. Crazy, weird, almost indescribable novels, which I highly recommend. I love them. Those were written in the late 80s, early 90s. And then there's a series of novels about Elric in America, or Elric in Europe, which are, I believe, The Driefnith's Daughter, The White Wolf's Son, and The Skraeling Tree, which is kind of about Vikings. That's a very interesting novel, too. They're all interesting novels, though. In truth, they're a little bit more about the character Ulrich von Beck, who is a sort of a different version of Elric. He's kind of a cousin of Elric's. And those novels are primarily about him and his struggle with this evil character named Prince Gaynor, the Damned. And you find out why he's called that in the books. I recommend everything. I recommend all the Elric novels and the other Eternal Champion novels as well, particularly the final novel of Ericosa, the Eternal Champion, The Dragon in the Sword, has some very interesting revelations in it. People keep saying, oh, Moorcock's just going back doing the same thing over again. I disagree. The way these books are written, there's a lot of different things and different aspects. Yes, he's somewhat looking at things from different perspectives, but I don't see anything wrong with that, and I don't see anything wrong with revisiting certain characters. That's why, I'm still enthusiastic. There's a new Elric story called The Folk of the Forest that's about to be published, and I want to read it. Again, even knowing that, Elric died in Stormbringer, but I still want to read his other adventures because he's such an interesting and integral character. And I hope that if you haven't read any of the Elric books, that you do so. They're all available, particularly now in the brand new Saga Press editions. They've published 3 volumes, which include all of the stories and all of the novels, except for The Citadel of Forgotten Myths and this new story of The Folk of the Forest. Moorcock has said he's not going to write any more Elric novels, but he might write occasional short stories, and I certainly hope that he does. I hope that he's in good health for many, many years and continues to write these stories, because I find them fascinating. I like his other things, too. I like Jerry Cornelius. I like, Una Person. I like the Piat novels. I basically like everything he's written, but although some of them, are a little bit of a tough read. But The Eternal Champion particularly appeals to me. I think it's interesting. It plays with this idea of the multiverse, which Moorcock was using that term a long time before Marvel or DC or any of those other, even Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, he did write about it before Dungeons and Dragons existed. And he's not the inventor of the term. The term was invented by a British cleric to describe something completely different. But he was the first one to popularize it to mean, a plurality of different worlds and different realities. And he used it throughout these novels, and as both a background and a very interesting concept of multiple worlds. And if you haven't read these novels, you should do so. They're all terrific. I found the Hawkmoon novels a little bit lighter in tone, but they're still good. And they kind of poke fun at British society, too, which I enjoy. Okay, thank you, and have a nice day. And happy Halloween.